So while Krystal is pulling up her screen, it looks like she's having success right there. We are very thankful to have with us Krystal Snyder of Penn State Extension. Some of you may remember Krystal joined us, it was a year and a half or two ago, for the Connect to Industry session on the industrial hemp industry. And Krystal offered some great tips and suggestions as to how you can start incorporating that technical content into your curriculum and classes without actually growing hemp or any other plants that administrators might frown upon you keeping in the greenhouse. So Krystal, so good to have you back with us. It is all yours.
Awesome. All right. I am excited to be here. I'm going to keep my camera off just because my bandwidth isn't super great today. But things should be good. So let's get rolling. So John had asked me to talk about communication in horticulture. And really, this is a problem that is plaguing greenhouse growers and landscapers. I always hear people talk about like, we just don't understand how to talk to the layman or these new plant parents, because if you think about it, like how many plants are people buying right now, especially because of the pandemic? Like it's crazy. I was at my local greenhouse just the other day and they were like, we sold out of mums. We bought mums in. We even grew more mums than we grew last year and they're gone. And they said that they're going to up production for next year. So people are buying plants and all kinds of plants, or they're working on better landscapes or better turf grass or things like that. And sometimes it's hard to explain some of these, scientific things, or why do things cost as much as they do, and they are cheaper at a box store and not at my local greenhouse. So I'm going to talk about all of that great stuff. So let's move to the next slide here. So I'm an extension educator in horticulture. I am based in Northampton County, which is in Easton, right around Allentown and Bethlehem. So about as far east as you can get in the state. And I cover a lot of things like plant nutrition and cut flowers and hydroponic crop production and greenhouse floriculture and industrial hemp. But really my true love is greenhouse floriculture. Nothing makes me happier than a greenhouse full of poinsettias or bedding plants or hanging baskets. And this is something I think is really important as we see this market continue to grow. So what I'm going to talk about the why. Why do we want to teach our students to be able to talk to consumers? I'm going to talk about the goal of that. And then I'm really going to get into how to accomplish these things. And I'll be honest, your students are poised for greatness right now. So many greenhouses that I've talked to recently have been saying, hey, Krystal, do you know of any students either getting out of, technical high schools or community colleges or out of Penn State or Del Valle alone, looking for jobs as, section growers or assistant growers or landscapers or things like that. So there is a lot of opportunity out there right now. And if you can groom these students to become, really great at customer service, especially talking to these novice plant parents, it's going to go a long way in their careers. So the what and the why. What? Teaching these students communication tools for retail horticulture. And why are we going to do this? Number one, we want to offer excellent customer service, right? We want our landscape companies to be able to upsell, and maybe get business from one of those big chain places, or, we want customers to continue to come back. We want to teach our students how to upsell those products too. Like, if a grower, I always tell this story, it's kind of funny. I worked at a greenhouse all through high school and college. And the deal was that if somebody came to the counter and they had multiple plants, 1 plant, 20 plants, 5 flats and 3 hanging baskets, it didn't matter. You always said, do you need fertilizer? And do you need potting soil? You always tried to sell those because we all know, right? We got to feed our plants. So fast forward 15 years and I worked for a fertilizer company. And I happened to show up at the same greenhouse to buy my plants. And the girl who was checking me out said, wait, do you need any fertilizer? And the owner happened to be standing there and he laughed and he said, no, she brings it home by the 25-pound bag. but that grower is so good about teaching his young high school and young college students to upsell those products. And really that makes those plant parents better plant parents, because they're not going out and buying, maybe poor quality topsoil, or maybe the wrong fertilizers for their plants and things like that. We want to keep customers coming back, and we want to keep them successful. And if we can teach our students to talk to these customers, those people will remember that, and they'll say, oh, you know what? I remember when I went to XYZ greenhouse, they had retail helpers who knew what they were talking about and directed me in the right places and told me what plants I should buy. The other thing is to really, in the end goal, we want to make our students more marketable for employers. We want them to get out into the world and have a knowledge of maybe some retail, or maybe some, market design or landscape design or sustainability, or, understanding why things cost what they do. And I think that, by trying to integrate some of this into your lesson plans is going to make a big difference. And it's really easy. I promise I wouldn't give you something hard, because I used to be a teacher and I remember how it is. So the goal, really, like I said, the goal is to help these new and novice plant owners understand the value of horticultural products. And this is really tough. And I'm going to get into this later down the presentation. But that's something to keep in the back of your mind. We want to help students explain the plants and the value in plain terms. Nobody rolls into a greenhouse and says, I would like, 1 gallon of glyphosate. They say, hey, do you got any Roundup so I can spray on my lawn? We want to help those students, remember to use those plain terms. And the same thing for plants as well. Growers will, homeowners come in and said, hey, I want to buy some knockout roses. They don't know what the genus or the species is or anything like that. And we want customers to be successful. I think this is the most important thing. We want to teach our students to go out into the world and to help the people who they are selling plants to, or maybe doing landscape design for, or, maybe they do all their lawn care for them. We want to help those customers be successful in the future, so they, return back to the industry and keep putting money back into horticulture, because that's what drives bringing in new students for our programs and things like that. So how are we going to accomplish this? So I'm going to go through kind of the overview of what I'm going to cover, and then I'm going to really get into the nitty-gritty of these things. So number one, we want to teach the buzzwords. And I know everybody hates the buzzwords like sustainability and it's green, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to go a long way. We want to teach students by maintenance level. I'm going to go over lightening up those technical terms, encouraging students to become the resident expert. Sorry, I lost my mouse for a second. Talking about the cost elephant, and how do we bring that up with students to explain to customers why our plants cost more than the box store down the street, or cost more than the flower tent or something like that. And how we're going to use this and integrate this into our plant sales, and by making it like a teachable moment. So let's talk about those buzzwords. So grown here, sold here. This is huge right now. We all know about how people are super into locally grown produce. The same can be said for locally grown flowers, or locally grown cut flowers, or vegetable plants for that matter, because, especially with the supply chain issues, consumers want to walk into a greenhouse for bubblegum pink petunias and be able to buy their bubblegum pink petunias. And if you can, have those signages in your greenhouse when you do your plant sales, or, reminding students that we want to show the value that we grew this from a seed or from a cutting, and we've cared for it the entire time, and it hasn't been driven on a truck from California, or, maybe it's a maybe it's a 3-foot tall evergreen tree, in a pot or ball and burlapped. And, it's been grown here. It's been grown here in Pennsylvania. It's been acclimated to the climate. It wasn't trucked in from somewhere on the western side of the country where it's really dry and it's not humid. And then these plants struggle to live here. The other thing to remember is that, grown here, sold here, a lot of the plants that people, choose to sell in their operations have been trialed here by plant companies. So those plant companies, like, I'm just going to use an example, Ball Horticulture, sells hundreds and thousands of plants, different types of plants, to greenhouse growers all over the world. But the ones that you buy in Pennsylvania have been trialed in Pennsylvania. They know they perform well here. They're not going to send out a geranium that, has tons of issues with diseases in a super hot and humid climate like Pennsylvania. They're going to look for those ones that have some natural disease resistance, or, maybe they just perform better in our hot and humid climates. So that's really something to remember and, think about. If you go to, a big giant box store in, the middle of May, they have tons and tons of plants. But where the heck are those plants grown? They might be grown in North Carolina. They might be grown in Pennsylvania. They might be grown in New York or Illinois or somewhere, and they've been trucked all the way from those other states to Pennsylvania, been put out on a cart, been put out on a rack, haven't been watered, haven't been cared for, things like that. So that quality is a big thing to remember too, that, our plants have always been well taken care of when they're grown here, sold here. Sustainable and green. And I know lots of people hate those buzzwords, but this is a big one. And this kind of covers a lot of horticulture right now. We can think about sustainable packaging. Are we sending home our customers plants in peat pots, which, yes, are biodegradable, but there's a peat shortage? Are we sending home our customers plants in non-recyclable plastic packaging? Maybe we're sending them home in, packaging that is compostable or it's recyclable. Those are the things we want to highlight those, and we want our students to highlight those too. Maybe your school operation or the operation that a student works for is really big into biocontrols, and they're talking about, they can say to these customers, like, we try our very best to harvest rainwater to use to water our plants, or we use biocontrols like ladybird beetles to control aphids. People love that. People eat that up. It's also the kind of thing that you have to think about on the lawn care side of things. I just saw that a town in, I think it was California, has outlawed gas-powered lawn care equipment. So mowers, blowers, weed whackers, they all have to be battery powered now. So I was talking to a landscape company who I happen to be friends with, and they were like, what happens if that happens in Pennsylvania? And I said, it doesn't matter if it happens in Pennsylvania. I was like, you got to market that. You got to say, hey, did you know that we use renewable resources? We don't use gas powered lawnmowers anymore. We use all electric. We use clean energy, things like that. I think, like, if you spin it the right way, people will eat that up. Oh, and if you guys have any questions, just throw them in the chat, and I'm happy to talk about them. The end of the hose plant. I think this is a great one. I learned this from Proven Winners, and this is something that, you never really thought about, but it's like that kind of tough plant that'll live in like the desert almost of your garden, where, the hose doesn't totally reach to the end. So it may only get a little bit of water, or it only gets water when it rains. I mean, this is a good one for folks who might not be great plant people. Maybe they don't know how much water to give a plant, and things like that. Then actually thinking about that, it makes me think of, there's all these great new plant apps for plant parents. And some of my friends, they're like, hey, have you ever used one of those? And I'm like, no, guys, I'm a plant scientist. But then on the other hand, I was like, oh, maybe I should look into these so we can teach people how to use them and, see how accurate they are. The haircut. I think a lot of people get afraid when they see, like, hey, you got to prune those plants. But if you if you see, like, you teach your students, that it's okay to prune their plants and to make it normal for them. And, explain to customers and consumers why it's really good to give plants a haircut sometimes, like it's scary. I get it. I had a 6 foot tall fiddle leaf fig that was uber unhappy at home. It used to live in my office. So I gave it a really serious haircut, and you know what? It's happier than ever. But I think it scares people sometimes. So it's, students and customer, you have to explain to your students who are working in retail that it's okay to prune plants, and how to do it correctly. Another big one is pet friendly. We want, it's a good thing to remind our students that say, like, hey, these plants are pet friendly, especially with so many people buying houseplants. So many people bought the pandemic puppy. I'm one of them. I got a pandemic puppy. People are thinking about this. Are these plants pet friendly? Are these chemicals that we're using, maybe fertilizers or weed killers or weed and feeds, are they pet friendly too? Is our rock salt that our landscape guys are putting down, is it pet friendly? That's a really big one to remember too. And, to kind of hit home to these students. And then this one, the right place, right plant. I give talks to master gardeners and to greenhouse growers and landscapers all the time. And I always talk about right place, right plant. You might have a customer who comes in and says, I really, really want a little limelight hydrangea, but they only have, an area that's really wet, and it maybe only has 75% or 75% shade. So a little bit of sun, really wet feet. And you realize, like, your student realizes, like, hey, I know the culture of that plant is not going to be happy in that space. And you have to kind of teach the students to say, well, I understand that you really want this plant. And, you kind of have to draw it out of them, of saying, like, to the customer, teaching the students to say to the customer, well, what is it that you want about that plant? Or what is it that you like about that plant? And maybe we can find something that is going to perform a little bit better and is not going to cause as much stress to you as the homeowner, or, you're not going to have to replace it in 2 years. I had a customer, a client, come to the extension office 2 years ago, and they replaced the same tree 3 times in the same spot. And finally, I said to the landscape company, I was like, why do you keep putting the same tree in the same spot? And they said, it's what the customer wants. And I said to them, I was like, but you understand the reason that the tree isn't performing well is because of the spot the customer wants it in. I was like, we have to look for a better plant to put in this place. And once they finally figured out how to explain that to the client and to the homeowner a little bit better, it was all good. And they picked a different plant and they're super happy. And the plant is alive still. Or I see lots of people want, fiddle leaf figs, and they're really cranky plants, if you don't take care of them right. So it's important to, remind, even like for houseplants, that, some plants like bright light, some plants like eastern facing windows, some only like kind of a little bit of light, things like that. And if you can teach your students to explain those things in really layman's terms and not make it super scientific, it's gonna go a long way with these customers. So let's talk about maintenance. So remember I said about teaching about maintenance. So, right, we teach about annuals and perennials. We teach about sun versus shade. We teach about natives and non-natives. Well, why the heck aren't we including maintenance into this equation too? I think about my career in horticulture and what I've been doing for many years. And I see the cyclical nature of plants and what plants are out on the market and what are available and things like that. And then, I realized that when I was in high school, 20 years ago or whatever, 25 years ago, we sold a crazy amount of geraniums, like so many geraniums, 4-inch potted geraniums. I could probably count on one hand now how many of my greenhouse growers sell 4-inch potted geraniums for a multitude of reasons. But the big one is maintenance. how many millennials have time to deadhead their geraniums? I sure don't. I taught my 8-year-old how to do it when she was about 4, and she hates to do it too. So it's funny because I talk to my friends, my millennial friends, and they're like, hey, Krystal, we want a plant that comes back every year and it blooms all summer long. And what is that? What does that exist? And I don't want to have to deadhead it. So, maybe we need to start teaching, grouping plants by low maintenance or moderate maintenance or high maintenance plants. And let's not just think about water needs. Why aren't we thinking about deadheading? Like I said, deadheading petunia or geraniums, or maybe we should steer them to dahlias, which also need to be deadheaded, but are a little bit more forgiving, or maybe, to self-cleaning petunias. Are they plants and shrubs that need annual pruning? Goodness, let's talk about hydrangeas. There are so many hydrangeas on the market now that some bloom on new wood and some bloom on old wood and some bloom on both. And if you screw up, you're not going to have flowers for multiple years. And that stresses homeowners out and clients. They get upset because they're like, well, I did this because I thought this was right. And that's something we need to think about. Why aren't we thinking about heavy feeders and moderate feeders? We should be teaching our students that, plants do need to be fed and plants need to be fertilized, but, a plant like an impatient or a lobelia might not need nearly as much fertilizer as a geranium or a petunia. So that's kind of something to think about too. Or, is it really how many times a year or multiple years are they going to have these perennials have to be divided? Can they be hanging out for 5 years, or maybe they have to be divided every 2 years? Or is it gladiola bulbs that we have to dig up every year, or dahlias or things like that? So I think we need to start to think about the long-term, maintenance and time that goes into some of these plants. As I get older and my kids get older and, they got a million things going on in their lives, I just don't have time to garden as much as I used to. And, I've been moving to more perennial plants because I don't have to plant them every year. I still have lots of annuals, but, that's something, maybe you can kind of hone in on that, millennial kind of thing, or the maintenance of some of these plants, or, how much water does it need, things like that. All right. Lighten up. So I have to tell you, I didn't have a lot of really great pictures to go along with this talk. So you guys get to see lots of pictures from my travels in greenhouses, which is kind of fun. But let's lighten up this technical talk here. Yes, botanical names are important. But like I said before, customers are going to come in looking for things like knockout roses and Kentucky bluegrass. They aren't going to, they're not going to know the difference between impatient hawkberry and impatiens wallerina. They know the difference between sun patience and traditional impatiens. That they know, but they don't know the botanical names of these things. And, and I think it's really important. I do a lot of work with our flower trials, and I see lots of people throwing around botanical names, and then botanical names keep changing, or the genus keeps changing. And I'm like, we can't keep up with this. So if we, try to use those common names for plants while we're, talking to consumers, I think it really goes a long way, because, they remember like, oh yeah, my nanny always planted petunias. I know what a petunia is, or I know what a pansy is. Or sometimes, you have people come in and they don't know the difference between a petunia and a pansy, but they know they really like that bright pink flower they see around everybody's mailbox in Lancaster County. And then you have to think, oh yeah, they're probably talking about petunias. We also want to teach the practical along with the scientific too. We see these commercials for, potting soil with moisture guard and extra fertilizer and things like that. And all of those are really good. But then on the flip side, we have to think about how long those have been sitting on shelves in warehouses, right? Or where they've been, or how good is any of that stuff. So, we want to teach our students to teach our customers, is it really practical to spend that extra money on special fertilizer or soil with fertilizer and wetting agent and things like that, when they could buy a really great soil product that might be made locally, for a fraction of the cost, it's still just as good, and they might not have, any issues with it anyway. So, those are things to think about. I know some garden centers carry plant chemicals or weed chemicals or things like that. And like I said before, a lot of times consumers aren't going to know the chemical names of some of these things like glyphosate. Well, they might know glyphosate because it's all over the news, but they're not going to come in and say, I want glyphosate. They're going to come in and say, hey, I need Roundup for my weeds, or I need, sometimes they'll say they'll know they need a systemic insecticide, but a lot of times they won't. They'll be like, I just need something to kill these bugs on my tomato plant. And things like that. So don't try to glitter the customer with science, because their eyes will glaze over, and they'll unfortunately they'll probably start to feel kind of stupid, because they're like, what the heck are you people talking about? But if you take the customer over to your thing, and your student says, okay, we have this chemical, we also have this one and this one, and these are like the trade names, and this is how they work. And, not by saying, systemic, it's not we know what a systemic is, but the average homeowner might not. But if the student says, hey, you put this in the soil and the plant takes it up, and then when the bug bites the plant and the bug dies, people understand that, right? That's like layman's terms. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. And, kind of going off of that of, bringing other, real world and kind of toning it down for these customers. And it's important to remember, customers have no clue what they're looking for. Usually they don't really know what thrives in right places. You know what they know? They know that they've seen things on Instagram or social media, or driving around in people's neighborhoods and saying, oh my gosh, I saw these really great hanging baskets. I don't really know what they are, but I want to put them here. And, they might have found something that loves full sun, and they don't have full sun. Or, they see these really great Boston ferns in baskets, but they have full sun. And by, June, their baskets will be crispy. So, it's important to kind of, like I said before, draw that out of it and talk to those customers and trying to figure out what they need. This is a big one. I think this is really important. But becoming the resident expert. So years ago, I taught greenhouse management at Del Val College or University for about 5 years. And this is something I did with my students, and they loved it. And what I did was I made them become the resident expert. So we grew a bunch of things, and I gave every student a plant, and I said, listen, I was like, this is your job. Your job is to figure out all the things about this plant, where it's going to be happy in the greenhouse, where it's going to be happy in the landscape. What are the diseases they might have issues with? Is it a perennial? Is it annual? Is it biennial? What kind of fertilizer does it like? What kind of, how much light does it need? Things like that. If you can foster this within your students, maybe they are really good at turf, or maybe vegetable plants or evergreens or poinsettias. This will, kind of give them a long way, because, greenhouses and garden centers are thinking about this. They're thinking about when they bring new customers on, or new employees on, they're like, okay, well, how much plant knowledge do they have? Or what are, things like that. So I think this is a really important thing. Or maybe you have a couple students who have a really great eye for container design. And you want to foster that, and say, you do a great job at container design, and why are you picking these things? And maybe that's something that, these students can help customers with, and say, okay, well, remember, you need something that's going to be really tall, you want something that drapes, and you want something that fills out. I know there's a couple greenhouses that I visited in my time that have planting bars, or they sell their plants by color or by size. And then you can kind of go through and build your own container. But if you have a student who's really into that, or maybe it's floral design, to try to, get them to expand on that knowledge, and explain to the customers, like, why do you want to have a a thriller and a spiller and a filler, and why you don't want to put petunias and geraniums in the same pot or things like that. We want to foster this kind of resident expert thing, but we also want them to remember the broad stuff too, right? Like we want them to remember that, to teach these clients and about why we need to feed our plants, or why it's important to water, even if it rained yesterday, in the middle of summer, or things like that. So it's kind of important, to have that kind of balance. But I think, in the end, it's a big difference. All right, so this is a big one, and let's talk about this elephant in the greenhouse, the cost thing. Okay, so I got 2 examples. I'll probably pepper in a couple more that aren't on the slide though. So, I always see this. I deal with this with people all the time. You have a customer, let's say your FFA is growing poinsettias, and you are selling, I pulled these prices out of the air, but I think they're pretty close. Okay, you're selling a 6-inch poinsettia with multiple stems and multiple blooms for $8.99. And the customer says, well, I saw in the big box stores Black Friday ad that they're selling a 6-inch pot for $1.99. Why is your plant $9 and that one's only $2? Okay, so we have to think about this. Well, we know why it's $9, right? We know that we've been growing this plant since August, and it takes a whole lot of fertilizer and chemicals and, water and things like that. But the customer doesn't get that. They don't think about the heat cost or the cost of oil or things like that when it comes to growing plants, right? They're just buying a plant because it's pretty. So you got to sell the upsell. So you can say, well, and this is what your students have to remember, because they're going to be like, well, I don't know, go to Home Depot and buy one. But that's not the answer we want to say. We want to say, okay, well, we're charging more. But if you look at our poinsettias, you're getting multiple stems. We have 6 blooms on this pot. That one only has 1 bloom. You're getting more color. You can say that this plant has been cared for here. It's been watered properly. It's been fed properly. We know that it will last as long as you take care of it, well into the spring, right? You can't say that about the $1.99 box store one, can you? I don't think so. And that's something that's really, that's a hard one to think about. And it's a hard one to explain without getting upset, because I totally understand it. I've grown poinsettias before, and it's a lot of work, and I totally think we should charge more for them, but we can't, because we get undercut by these box stores. So this is something that, we have to think about. Or, people go to Costco and they buy these huge wreaths at Christmas time for $16.99. And I'm not going to lie, they're gorgeous. But then you're selling a wreath for 3 times the price. And the customer's like, well, I'll just go to Costco and buy it. And then they're like, well, these greens were harvested here. They were harvested last week. We hand tie our wreaths, things like that. Whereas the Costco wreath is coming from Washington on a truck. It was probably made in September. It's already been sitting in a cooler for 2 months, things like that. So we have to kind of explain the freshness. The same thing with cut flowers. We could do the same thing for cut flowers. We could say, hey, you could buy a bouquet at the Giant and spend $4, or you could buy our cut flowers that we, grew out back, and, they're going to last for at least 2 weeks. And this is why you should buy them. They weren't treated with tons of chemicals and things like that. Another really good example is in the perennial world. When I was in high school, we used to sell perennials a lot as like 4-inch pots, not in bloom. Which is kind of weird. And now you think about it. But a lot of perennial growers are now selling 2-year-old perennials that they planted in the spring, overwintered, and grown out into a larger size, and then sold in color. So the customer is in the greenhouse and he says, okay, well, I want to know why this little tiny 4-inch one is only $3.50, but the gallon one is $15.99. And, there's a lot of factors that go into that. It's a bigger pot, it's more soil. A lot of times we put 2 or 3 4-inch pots in a 1-gallon perennial. And then we overwinter it. But the homeowner doesn't care about that, right? They care about the price. They see the bottom line. And in this case, I would teach my students, okay, like we're overwintering a plant. We know that that plant already has inherent hardiness in our location, right? We know that it's made it through a summer. We know that it's made it through a winter. So we're pretty sure it's probably going to make it, right? And that's something that we have to tell these people. The same thing if we're buying like, a whip tree, or we're buying a 3-year-old tree in a ball and burlap, or a 4-year-old tree. The customer is like, well, I could buy this tree and I could wait 10 years for it to be this size. Well, are you really going to take care of it well enough to make it to that size? I don't know. So those are a couple things that I think about, and it's hard. The cost thing is always hard. And especially now, the cost of pots are going up, the cost of soil is going up. There's soil supply issues, there's fertilizer supply issues, and there's plant supply issues too. So I think, we're going to have to get creative of how we price things and how we explain what our prices are. So I think the best way to kind of teach students to really do this is to do this into our plant sales. So I know a lot of ag programs have FFA plant sales in the spring. And I think that this is a really good way to coach your students and say, okay, well, we have this plant sale, and this is a really good way to kind of show your stuff, right? So this kind of goes twofold too, because we can see our students interacting with customers at our plant shop, our plant sales, or our flower shop. If you have a flower shop at your, or your greenhouse, maybe you can say to them, have students teach a customer about something, about the plant that they're buying, so maybe, maybe you are having a house plant sale and people are wondering, how much water should I give this orchid? Or how much water do I give a fiddle leaf fig? Or what kind of light does it like? Maybe have a student be at that, at that section of the plant sale saying, hey, you're going to take home this fiddle leaf fig. Make sure you water it with like a cup of water, every Friday or something like that. Or, maybe you're selling vegetable transplants and, you have a student at that station who says, hey, did you know that when you plant your tomato transplant, you want to kind of trench it in so you get better root system, or things like that. Like those are really easy things that students can remember, and, give them each a job of that thing at the plant sale, and to remind customers why we're doing that. Or, maybe you have these big container plants, or you have little tiny ones, and you can explain, well, yeah, we have these small ones here, and you could buy all these different parts and pieces. Let's take an example, this planter right here. You could sell individual canna lilies and lantanas and vinca and petunias, right? You could sell each one of those in a 4-inch pot for whatever price. And the customer could go home and they could recreate this, and you could sell them the recipe card, and they could say, hey, you can take these home and you can plant them, but then you got to wait like 4 weeks for it to fill out and look this pretty, right? Whereas, if you sell them the container, you can upsell that. Your students can say, well, you could spend a little bit more and you get this gorgeous pot, a fancy pot that it's in. It's already been planted together. It's grown out. It's instant satisfaction. It's instant gratification, and it's instant color, and it will be gorgeous, right? So I think those are the things that you have to look at it from the consumer side of things. Like you're wandering into a greenhouse and you have no clue about plants. You have to pretend you have no clue about plants. And you have to put yourself in that customer's shoes of how to do that, right? And it's the same thing. We could do this with landscape design, or we could do it with turf. If we are offering, turf care, you could integrate an easy $9 soil test into your regular customers' lawn care services. So maybe you mow their grass, you have students who have a small landscape company, and they, have a handful of customers, and they mow their grass, and then they do some other stuff, but they pay one of those big franchises to do all their fertilizing. Well, if you teach your students how to do a soil test. That's $9. Soil test is $9 from Penn State. They could integrate that into their customers' turf care. They could say, hey, you know what? I know that you hire, the big guys to come out here and fertilize, but did you know that I can take a soil test? I will send it off to the Penn State lab. They'll tell us exactly what you need for your soil to make your turf grass grow is the best it can. And, and we'll go from there. And a lot of times that goes a long way of, with these students and teaching them how to make themselves be better than, maybe what they can get at a box store or buy a franchise or something like that. So I think that's, you have to look for the easy ways to teach these students to kind of bring it down. But on the flip side, you as the teacher have to bring that kind of knowledge down into that layman's terms to teach the students. And I know that sometimes that can be hard. But, that's kind of what I would, look for and things like that. So give me 1 second. So I left a little bit of time for questions because I wasn't sure how many folks would be on or if there would be other questions, or things like that. So I am open to whatever you have.
Well, while you're thinking of potential questions to ask Krystal, I would just like to say, in reference to Krystal's one slide about right plant, right place, I think that we found the right presenter, right topic, in bringing Krystal in to do this, because this was sort of a topic brought to us by the advisory committee, that we formed for our horticultural PD. And I actually reached out to Krystal to see if she had any references of folks that she could send me to that could potentially do this. And when she saw the topic, she said, "Oh, I can do that for you." And she did a great job. So thank you very much, Krystal. Do we have any questions out there? Feel free to put them in the chat. And I think we're at an opportunity where you can also feel free to unmute and ask verbally if you like. Okay, Ryan does not have any questions. Thank you very much, Ryan. Melanie, Olivia, any of you have questions?